The new Optimus bot demo is out and it is exciting, I guess, in a few ways, but the future is more exciting. There are a lot of misunderstandings about it, so rather than go to some randoms in the comments or even on X, I decided to bring in, I don't know, maybe an expert in robotics like Dr. Scott Walter, who has been working in robotics for decades, designing lines, simulating robot movements, all those things. He is the brightest guy we can find who is not bound by a non-disclosure agreement, and he is a tremendous asset. Welcome to Futuraza. Yeah. See, we're wearing the same outfits as we wore just the other day. That's so crazy.
Yeah.
It's almost like we shot them back to back.
Yeah.
So we saw some new things, but not really much exciting. It was what we found out afterward that's more interesting. Are we going to look at this, for example? What's going on here?
Yes. To me, that was the big news. So we looked at it and it was like kind of meh as far as the video. And then this caused some engagement from Elon on Sunday morning. And this came a couple hours later after my other hot takes. So we didn't even know about this. And so we see that the new Optimus Hand later this year will have 22 DOF. Do you know what DOF stands for?
Yes, digits of finger. It's going to be a Chat GPT hand. Directions of freedom?
Degrees of freedom. That's degrees of freedom. Yes. So every time you see that, that's what it will be.
So not 22 digits of fingers. Well, I stand corrected.
22 degrees of freedom. And then a little bit more down there, and the actuators will move mostly entirely into the forearm, just like how humans work.
Oh.
Now, what's an actuator? What is an actuator?
Well, it's not a motor. It's a thing that moves forward and back rather than in a circle.
Well, it kind of can go in a circle. I guess I think of an actuator as being more or less like a fancy motor. So it's a motor that has other stuff on there to control its position more accurately than a motor. Because usually a motor, you just turn it on, it spins, whereas an actuator usually tries to control the movement, both applying, let's say, the correct speed and position and everything else. You got encoders in there and everything else. So it's something that makes something move is the best way to think about it. And you can have rotary actuators and you can have linear actuators. You got to do something to make those fingers move. And so the first question I want to ask you, Brian, is how many DOFs, degrees of freedom, does the current hand have? Do you know?
Oh, let's see. I'd guess 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 14, 15?
No, actually it has 11 right now.
Okay.
Just has 11. And do you know how many actuators each hand has?
No.
6. Okay. So there's 5 fingers, yet there's 6 actuators, and there's 11 degrees of freedom. So I want to clear all this up, what they mean by degrees of freedom. So degrees of freedom are basically points of movement that you can have on there. And if you remember Isaacson's book, they had a discussion in there about the Optimus team designing this. And the first thing that Elon always talks about, what is it like? I think number two or number 3 in his algorithm is the best part is no part, right?
Right.
So the team is trying to figure out, it's like, okay, we're going to design a hand. And there's a big discussion. It's like, should it be 3 fingers or 4 fingers or something like that? Because, for standard industrial manipulators or grippers that you have in a robot, sometimes like just a 2-finger gripper is good enough to pick up things like a box. But if you're going to pick up a cylinder or something like that, something like this, 2 fingers is not good because you might slip off. So you might make a 3-finger gripper. And there's like, oh, we'll design it for that. And whether it's a flat one or curved or stuff like that. But if they're going to go general purpose, head to the side, and they were like, well, can we get by with 4 fingers? Maybe do a 4-finger. But eventually said, we'll go with that. But the second best thing besides, the best part is no part is the best skew is no skew. So all the fingers are identical. They're the same length. So they did that.
One was a little longer.
It looks longer only because the offset of where it's connected. Yes. See, they tricked you, Brian. That's the whole idea is it looks human, but it's not. And the other thing they did is they did reduce one part because rather than having 3 knuckles starting down here, they only have 2. But in doing that, this middle knuckle here, they kind of moved up a little bit higher. So this lower, what they call phalanges, is a little bit longer than you would typically see in human. And of course, all the fingers are the same length, but they almost look like they're offset and everything else. And they did that to reduce the complexity and the skews and everything else and just go with that. Now, so you have basically 2 knuckles, which means you can articulate here and you can articulate there. So those are 2 degrees of freedom. However, you now need a motor to actuate that. And then how do you think it's actuated?
Well, all the way.
Put how do we do it? How do our
Yeah,
hands work?
it's just a string basically.
Yes, a string or a tendon. So they have a tendon that's connected to a motor that's down here in the palm that winds it up. And as it winds it up, it does this. Now, the thing that happens is the degrees of freedom are not all independent. So these two are basically coupled together. So one motor, 2 degrees of freedom. So you move that motor and both of them have to move together. You can't say, oh, I only want to move this knuckle, move that one individually. They're moving together. There's not much you can do. And the only thing that keeps one of them from moving is like there's resistance or something. So that's how it actuates. Now, the other thing is like, remember, this is working like your bicycle, where you pump the brakes in your bicycle, right? You got a cable that's going in there that's making the calipers close. Now, when you release the brake, what makes the caliper open?
Well, spring.
A spring, exactly. So they actually built right into the knuckles these little springs to make sure it opens up. So when they release the tendons, it's the spring that's making it open up. Now, we have a lot of force and grip, right? But not so much like this. And the analogy I like to also use is like an alligator, right? Is like you cannot open up an alligator's mouth, right? If it wants it closed, it's closed. However, you can prevent an alligator from being able to open up his mouth because it has absolutely no strength going up. Everything is in the clamping force. So you need to have the springs there to make it open up. And that's basically how it's actuated. And they hide all the actuators down here. And these fingers can only move in one direction, forward, clasp like this. Now, Brian, did you ever play the piano?
Yes.
Okay. And do you play the piano like this?
I do not.
Do you have to do this every now and then?
I do.
Yeah, you have to do a spread to get like an octave or an octave and a half or something like that.
Right.
And if you're Trekkie, you need to do this too, right?
Right.
So you need to have the ability to be able to move your fingers this way. Optimus and all the other bots, except for Sanctuary, cannot do that. And I think that's called like adduction, abduction, where this is like called a flexion movement. We'll just call this like grasping and like doing a spread of your fingers out this way. So the current Optimus can't do that. And so now the question is like, okay, we've got 11 degrees of freedom. We got 6 actuators. Let's figure out where's the new movement's going to be? Where's those 22 degrees of freedom coming from? They're not adding fingers. They're not taking away fingers. Okay. And how many actuators are going to put in there? And where are they going to stuff those actuators? Because now you get 22 degrees of freedom. Whoa, where the actuators going to go? Why are you going to have them? Now, the thumb, unlike the fingers, actually has 2 degrees of freedom. So the thumb was designed to be able to move like this way and like some other way like that. So they basically have they've got like 5 actuators that go down like this and one that actually goes across for the thumb to be able to do this movement and like that. Now, look at your fingers. How many knuckles do you have on your fingers?
1, 2. I mean, are we counting these? So like
yeah. So 1, 2,
15?
3, right?
Yeah.
Well, just on one finger.
Oh, I see.
1,
1,
2,
2,
3.
3.
1, 2, 3, right. And how many on your thumb?
1, 2. I mean,
2,
really
right.
Yeah.
So what they're doing with the 22, I'm pretty sure they're going to add the knuckles back in. So that means their fingers are going to have full knuckles. So now we're going from 2 knuckles to 3 knuckles. So that means they're adding right there 4 more degrees of freedom. So we're going from 11, that gets us up to 15, right?
Right.
The thumb doesn't need another knuckle. They're not adding another one in there. And it turns out the thumb has enough movement in there already. There is no like other movement you really need to give the thumb. So they are getting ready to do this as well. Now to do that, that means you're adding 1, 2, another 4 right there. Bang, we're at 19. Okay, so we're at 19 right now. All right, you still got 3 more. We got to figure out where those are going to be. So if you actually like Google how many degrees of freedom does a hand have, it's going to be pretty much, I mean, you'll get kind of one answer, but which is 27, which I'm going to try to break down for a second. But the thing is, if you really ask a bunch of biomechanists, it's the same thing as asking like 10 tax attorneys to do the same tax filing, and you'll get 20 different answers, right? So how many degrees of freedom does a human hand really have? Oh, well, the main thing is like, what do the typical models have? When I looked at it, they all say it's like 27, but they include the wrist in there. And they include not only the rotations of the wrist, but the translations of the wrist. So it's like, whoa, wait a minute. You're really talking about 21 degrees of freedom if you really break it down. And so I'm like scratching my head. It's like, wait a minute, we're at 19. We need to get 2 more in there. It looks like a real hand has 22. And as far as the current Optimus hand is, they do not count the 11 degrees of freedom in there as the wrist. The wrist is part of the arm. And of course, as we know in engineering, a lot of times when things are very complex, we like to break them down into different subsystems. So all the robot manufacturers, we build an arm, and now we're building a hand that we're going to attach onto the arm. They are going in a different direction, which we saw slightly from that different post, the second post that came up from Elon. So the 22 degrees of freedom I thought was like going to really be in the hand and not include the wrists, because I have a hard time figuring out. And the only other thing is the possibility that is the palm, because see, we get a little bit of degree of freedom in our palm, and a lot of the biomechanics will say, well, a real human hand, you need to be able to scrunch the hand. You need to be able to move the palm a little bit. So I was assuming, yeah, maybe they're throwing a degree of freedom in the palm for some reason. That's a possibility, that they're going to add 1 degree of freedom to the palm. But what I think is happening is that they're including 2 of those degrees of freedoms from the wrist. So they may be including the 2 from the wrist, or 3, because the wrist really has 3 degrees of freedom. We've got 1 wrist, which comes, or let's say one of them, like right here. If you see like that section right there, that part there is fixed, and things roll about this. It pivots about that thing. That's one big motor. And that's the roll that allows you to do like this whole movement with your hand.
Right.
And then you've got these 2 actuators here, which is what are actually causing the wrist to flop up and down, which is a pitch, if they're moving together. And if they're moving separately, you get the side-to-side yawing kind of thing. And that's an ingenious kind of parallel kinematic design that makes the wrist very thin through there. And what's really nice about that is you can run stuff through that wrist because there's nothing blocking your way. Some of the other wrist designs, there are actuators sitting right there in the middle, in the way, and the only way you can get through there is you've got to route them through the outside. And what happens if you've got cables hanging off of your arm, Brian, and you're working in some very delicate area? What ends up happening?
They're always going to get snagged and broken.
Exactly. So you want to be able to get them in there and make sure they're enclosed. So that's a good wrist design for being able to do this. So when Elon says, oh, we're going to move some of the actuators back there, it's like, oh, yes, that's a good idea. It's just tendons anyways, right? So it's just a matter of running your bicycle cabling a little bit further rather than having in your hands. And it looks like there's some space there, but do you think the space that's back there right now is properly designed to be able to put those actuators in there?
I can't tell.
I mean, to me, it looks like, well, it's not like they can just shove them on in there. That's a total redesign. And when they're getting ready to redesign they're going to redesign the wrist. So we're not talking about a hand in a wrist mechanism. We are talking about a combined mechanism, an entire new lower arm, and which may include that roll axis, because you said, remember I said, I'm missing 3 degrees of freedom. Where are they coming from? Well, I know I have 2 normally out on the wrist, and we get that other one, which we may or may not have, which means they're probably changing that whole thing. And they're also going to change up the way those actuators are, because right now the actuators are pretty big. They're kind of spinning around and pulling something in there. So all you really need to have is something that pulls on a cable and then releases it. And if I can kind of pull on it with a certain amount of tension, do you think you need to have a spinny motor necessarily? Do you think you could come up with maybe some other more compact, more clever mechanism that you can kind of shove in there?
For sure.
Yeah. Now, this begs the question. We've got 6 actuators right now, which allow us to do this and what we want to do with a thumb. If I want to be able to spread my fingers out, I could link all those together and have 1 more actuator. So that gives us 7, right? So with 7, I can get the spread. But I want to do this, right?
Right.
And if I want to do that, that means I really have to, I can't add 1, I have to add 4 to those 6. So I would need at least 10. Wow, that's starting to take up a lot of room, unless you get some special little actuators that are able to fit back there to do what you need. And then there's the other thing with your finger. Remember I was saying, and we can go back and look at my hand in its full glory right now, is if we look at how we can move our fingers, usually when we move that 1 actuator, our fingers kind of curl up like this.
Right.
But I can do something like this, that I can move my fingers down straight.
Right.
That would require a different actuator, especially if I want to do it for each one of those things.
Right.
So that could be like another 4 you're putting on there. And so the thing is, depending upon how much finger control you have, do you want to be able to do this, okay, but do it separately as well, and not do it as like, oh, I'm going to have 1 actuator that allows my whole palm to scrunch like that. I want to be able to, and I also want to be able to do this. Oh, and I want to be able to do all my fingers separately. You're giving lots of degrees of freedom there. That might mean you're going to have a lot of actuators, but actuators take up space unless you've got some clever design that's very compact that's able to fit in there. This is where you start to design it as an integrated unit. You're not talking about an arm plus a hand. You're talking about the entire extremity.
What if right here you put in a motor that was so tiny it's like the one that vibrates in your phone and it just pulls the tendon to one side or the other?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
very
See, that's what
small,
I'm thinking. Because think
very
about it. It's like
cheap.
we need this to be strong. So I want to like a big actuator to do that. But we don't have a whole lot of strength doing that. So you don't
No.
need the same size actuator. We just position it there, please. Kind of hold it in there and allow me to then do
Right.
this where I
And
need to
it'll
have grip
stay
in
in
there.
place as soon as you've grabbed the whatever.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm thinking it's like, wow, if they're going to 22 degrees of freedom, and I'm pretty sure it's including the whole lower arm now.
Mm.
And now, why stop there, Brian? If you're redesigning that, why just stop there? Why aren't you then thinking about, wait a minute, what about the lower ankle? Because remember, the walking speed ain't that great right now. I mean, part of that comes from the foot. You think they might be thinking about, maybe we're going to start to do something with the feet. Also, if you're going to work up that tree, the elbow might change a little bit. I suspect they might have a slight change to the elbow. That will be a little modification. But then you get up to the shoulder. And how does a human shoulder work? Do you know what kind of joint that is?
A ball?
A
No.
ball and socket joint.
Yeah, yeah.
If you look at the whole human body, the entire human body that's in there, and all the joints that are in there, almost none of them are mechanical analogs to anything we have. We talk about the elbow being like, oh, it's like a door hinge, isn't it? Look in there.
No, it's not.
It's not a door hinge. It may be kind of like a door hinge, but it ain't a door hinge. But if you look at what's happening in your hip and what's happening up there, it's like it's a ball and socket joint. We have them all over the place mechanically. And why is it like the one part of the human body, which is a ball and socket joint, they put these motors that they stack together. It doesn't even look like a ball and socket joint. It just never made sense to me. It's like, why aren't they putting a ball and socket? Do you know why? Do you know what the answer is?
Roboticists didn't take biology?
No. The main reason is a ball and socket joint, while it's very easy to build, it's really hard to actuate and control.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
it's tricky. I mean, the things like, where the heck do you put the motor and stuff like that? And I've been saying, like, someone's got to come up and design a spherical actuator. Our actuators are cylindrical right now. Why doesn't someone sit down and figure out how do we design a spherical actuator or come up with some other way to be able to actuate this thing? And the human body has figured it out with like all these muscle and tendons and moving around and stuff like that. So basically the joint that we have up that we're building right now is stacking these different motors on there is kind of bulky. It's a little bit overkill. It doesn't actually simulate human motion correctly. It can have more range of motion. I mean, we saw Boston Dynamics with like its bizarre range of motion. So more range of motion you need, which means the motors are kind of overkill. It's like design a ball and socket joint where you actuate it. And if you're limited in your range of motion, that's okay because the human body is limited in that range of motion. And I don't want to, I can tell you, Tesla probably is not interested in coming up with a range of motion. And do you know why I think that?
Not necessary?
Well, part of that, but basically Elon's reply to the Boston Dynamics video was, I think, this one thing from the movie Ring or something like that, where this little girl basically does the same kind of weird way of kind of getting up. And he was just like, nah. and the other thing is like, if you're using teleoperation to train these things, you'd like it to be closer to the human body, which is probably why they're getting a better hand because they're beginning to realize that, hey, our hand gestures aren't mapping very well to Optimus. We want to come up with something that's more human-like.
So yeah, I guess Boston Dynamics human training set was from Cirque du Soleil. That makes sense.
Yes.
And what's fun is for the last 10 minutes or so, people have been sitting at home moving their hands and thinking about this. And
yes.
One of them could have a new solution that would be interesting. Certainly could share it in the comments.
Now, yes. Now, the other thing, this will be the last thing I'll leave you on, is the current Optimus bot, all the fingers are the same length. Mm-hmm. Do you think the next one, now that they've added those things, do you think each finger will be unique, or do you think they'll actually have a pinky? So maybe the normal three, see what are these different one, the ring, the middle, and the index finger, maybe they're identical, just with like that weird little offset down there. Or they have some components that are similar, but they just make the distal make it a little bit shorter or something like that. But maybe a real pinky. Because remember, the pinky's not only shorter, it's a little bit thinner. So my prediction is it's going to be more like a human hand.
I think my fear is that it would just lead to, tea breaks. Ping.
Ping.
If you don't have a pinky, you can't have a tea break. not a
this
proper
size.
one
You can
anyway.
also, they can also turn evil.
That's true. That's true. It's just not the same when they're all
All
it's
the
not,
same.
it
Yeah,
doesn't have the same
exactly.
impact.
Exactly. So,
You've got a few more slides. Did you want to share those before we?
well, yeah. So, the main reason was to help people sort of understand what's going on here with the hand. And as you can see, the wrist area
Oh,
is very thin and it's
oh.
very easy to run things through. We can also see right there kind of how the thumb mechanism works, how it rotates there. And this here is where we get a good close up of the hand. And if you look right here in the knuckles, if you look really closely in there where I'm circling, you're going to see where the springs are that allow the knuckles to pop out.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also count them. And you can also see those springs right down and along here. So we've got these knuckle joints and we get those knuckle joints. And you can see how the fingers almost look identical right down to the pinky. And the thumb is probably the closest thing that looks normal. But you do see we have like maybe a lot of space that we can use up here, but we could also maybe make this wrist a bit more compact with this new design. Because I have a feeling these actuators, they might say it's a bit overkill. They have two of them that are pretty big. And the beauty of that design is that for the most part, this pitching motion of your hand is the most important degree of freedom of the hand. Okay. And then this side to side, not so much. It's not, you have a little bit of strength there, but not that much. And they needed to figure out how to put it in there. Everyone else has accomplished that by putting a motor, a single dedicated motor that rotates this way and a single dedicated motor that rotates this way. So what that means is that if they want to get twice the pop going in this direction, they can't do it. They either need a bigger motor and these others are sitting around doing nothing. In this case, if you have both motors moving together, you can get twice the pop going that way. And they may realize like, well, it's nice that these motors are big for that, but that might even be too big. Maybe we can actually slim them down for what we need because with both of them in parallel, it's enough, especially a linear actuator like that. That's very stiff. So if the whole idea is that I've got to move my hand down there and I've got to hold this heavy weight, well, that's okay. The motor doesn't really have to hold the heavy weight. It just has to kind of lock in place while you're doing that. And then maybe there is something you need to be able to move it up. So it could be that they are able to slim that down, which means the forearm will be slimmer and then there'll be more room to start shoving all these other things in. And then again, the question comes down to whether that last joint way down here, this one here, which is fixed, there's an actuator built into there, whether they're sort of thinking, hey, can we take this whole design and really think about how to incorporate all 3 degrees of freedom in there in one package rather than making it separate? Because I really think they're driving towards taking a more integrated or holistic view towards the bot, not an arm plus another subsystem as a hand. And we've seen other bot manufacturers out there that say, look, we can take our hand off and pop another one on there. And I'm like, why? So when they've done that, they literally have said our hand is not going to be part of the arm solution. I think they're taking a more integrated approach. And if they're doing that, they may be thinking a more integrated approach on the feet as well. And then they might be say, hey, if we're going to go to a ball and socket joint up in the shoulder, which they may be doing, then the ball and socket joint can also be down in the hip because the hip is one. And if we start to do that, maybe we can redesign the whole torso so we can finally get that lean forward in the torso so it can actually get in the Cybertruck and drive it. I'm thinking they're working on a Gen 3 bot right now that is going to look very different than this. But what does that do to the timing? It's like, well, that thing is going to be so different that just like FSD doesn't work on the Cybertruck, you're not going to be able to take the learnings from Gen 2 and just move it over to Gen 3. Some of it maybe. You might be able to get enough of a foundation from it that it's just a little bit of time to gather the data and go ahead and do it. So that's kind of where I am, Brian. I'm breaking it here on your channel that I think at the end of the year, we're going to see a reveal for the Gen 3 bot, and it's not going to look anything like this. It's going to be very different. And it all started with the hands. Elon released too much information to the wrong person, and I'm sticking with it. They're not just redesigning the hands, they're redesigning the whole thing.
This would not be too surprising. Did you have any other slides you needed to show, or?
Oh, I mean, the only thing is like, if they go up the tree, if you look at the Gen 1 bot, and it's a little bit hard to see in some of these things here, right down there is the mechanism that makes the elbow rotate. And it's actually an actuator that's kind of stuck up in here, and it's like a piston cylinder kind of thing. So that rod pushes down, that pushes on the elbow, and it rotates like somewhere over here somewhere. So it's very much like the damper on your screen door. You kind of look up at that thing, that weird thing. It's that kind of triangular mechanism in there that's doing that. The problem with that is you see where this joint is sticking out? It's like the bottom of your elbow. And that thing is like, your elbow, you're always putting it on the table. It's always getting caught on things. I've always felt, oh, you could actually move it to the inside. Rather than putting it there, put it out there and it's less exposed. That would be a better place. Now, I can't tell, and you can see this mechanism a little bit better here if you couldn't tell from the others. But if you look at the new Optimus bots, I can't tell if that mechanism is still down here or if they moved it up somewhere else. And this was the naked Tesla Gen 2 bot that I looked at numerous times to try to see that mechanism, and nothing stuck out. I cannot see the elbow mechanism there because it's either so well hidden or it's so dark or it's so grainy. I can't tell for sure whether they moved it to the inside of the elbow, which is kind of where I would do it, because that's exactly where Aptronics does it. Aptronics is also doing the same kind of elbow mechanism, and they have it in the inside rather than the outside. And so if you're going to do basically a clean sheet design based on everything I had, that's the next thing I would do. So that's my prediction. It's going to be on the inside unless they decided to actually use a rotary joint instead. But I think they're going to stick with that solution just because I think they like it and a few others are that way. And then that shoulder, it's got to go. And if they come up with the ball and socket, man, I'll be so excited.
That's going to be fun. So we do have, I think if I can get Scott to come back for one more show, because there's a bunch of topics I wanted to cover that are that have to do with timelines and how far along we really are. I did want to say thank you for breaking the news that it will have 22 fingers and be as dangerous as an alligator's mouth. That is something that the world did not know, and I'm pretty sure I understood it. In the comments, what did I miss? What did I misunderstand? Was it that? It was probably that. Like, subscribe, do all those usual things. And don't forget that a big event coming up in Michigan in June. Dr. Scott Walter will be there. Dr. Know-It-All will be there. And Jan from Tesla Fix will be there. People that you mentioned earlier in the show who you know and are great experts with great guests. And you also mentioned Herbert. Check out Herbert's channel too. Dr. Scott Walter appears there regularly as well. They do some fantastic work. And we've got, all these great speakers in our lineup here. Nothing too revealing. We do have one big mystery guest. It may have been revealed by now, but we've got, look at this all-star lineup. Bearded Tesla guy, Dirty Tesla, this clown, Kyle Connor, Jan, and then, of course, some of the local. Mike is a local. MI Tesla guy. It's now Mike's EV Garage. John's coming out from California. Tesla Tina will be there. This guy, I don't know who that is. Lars from Best in Tesla. It's going to be quite the star-studded lineup, and we're going to have a whole lot of fun and do a big light show. And then on Sunday, we have a special plaid day where we're going to be it's a separate ticketed event where we're going to be tearing up a closed down stretch of roadway with the hottest EVs around and a whole bunch of Cybertrucks and plaids and other brands as well. So I hope you guys can join us for that. Head over to teslamichigan.org to get tickets, and we look forward to seeing you there. Everybody else, like, subscribe, do the usual. Give a shout out to Dr. Scott. Tell us if you want him back or if you've just heard enough of this guy. But I got bad news. He's coming back. So stay tuned, stay juicy, and I cannot wait to hear from you very clever robots in your 22 degrees of freedom.